Hey Meeting House Alliston, and welcome to this week's update video. Here are 3 things that I think you should have on your radar. Number 1, Jesus people. As always, it is my joy to highlight people within our community who are extending the peace and the love of Christ to their neighbors, their family and friends, and strangers within the community. For this week, I want to highlight Ruth Wright, Susan Sterrett, Mary Sebring, and Yvonne Conway. They have been using their incredible sewing skills to make masks for nurses and healthcare professionals at Stevenson Memorial Hospital. Isn't that such a tangible way of extending love and care and saying, we are in this with you, we stand in solidarity. So thank you so much for that. Number 2, the church in COVID-19 and post-COVID-19. Hey, this is a reminder for you to be praying for us as a leadership team, not just for us at the Meeting House Alliston and leadership, but also the leadership of the Meeting House broader family, as we continue to reflect on what it looks like to, yes, be the church here now in COVID-19, but beyond COVID-19, as the different restrictions change, as the different ways of being a church evolve. We want to be in line with God's Spirit and be aware of where He may be leading us. So please join with us in prayer for that. Number 3, comparative suffering. This past week I took some time off, and during my time off I was able to do a little bit of reading and listening to some podcasts. It was really good soul care. I was able to find energy where it was lacking and find some refreshment. And when I was listening to these podcasts and reading some of these articles and blogs, one of the themes that stood out was this idea of comparative suffering. And as I read it, I started to begin to see some of the symptoms and signs of this within myself. So I thought I would share it with you, and you might be suffering from comparative suffering yourself. Well, I guess the question is, what is comparative suffering? And again, I'm still making sense of this, so by no means am I an authority on this topic. But from what I can tell, comparative suffering is when we, wait for it, compare our suffering to others and some of the negative implications of that. One of the first negative implications that comes from that is that when we experience our own type of hardship, we are sort of programmed to downplay and to minimize our suffering in the light of suffering of others. So we think to ourselves, I'm just missing my family, but there are many people who have lost their jobs. There are many people who don't have food on the table. There are many people who are experiencing grief and loss to an extent far beyond mine. And so I shouldn't feel the way that I'm feeling or think these thoughts. And we minimize it and we downplay it instead of working through it and then actually coming out the other side. And the negative side of this is that we don't do justice to our own feelings. We actually lack self-compassion. And so it builds up inside, and we aren't then able to be fully present with ourselves or with others. The reality is hardship is hardship, hardship is hardship, and suffering is suffering. And if we begin to continually minimize our own suffering because of the suffering of others, then we forget that and we don't allow God to come into our life and to bring healing there. The second way comparative suffering kind of shows itself is through judgment. And I thought this past message really hit on this in certain ways. The idea is of this. So I'll give you an example. When I used to work as a youth pastor, I would engage a lot with students. And obviously these students were significantly younger than I was, and we had lived a different life, and experience comes. And so, when they would say, woe is me, I'm really hurting right now because this boy didn't ask me to prom, my first thought was, come on, give me a break. Like, there are way bigger things out there, and it's really not that important. But what I just did was, I just put them into a hardship Olympics, a suffering Olympics, and I decided that I was going to be the judge and to say what suffering is actually worthy of my attention, of my care, and what suffering is not. And that's dangerous when we become the judge, because what happens is we can't sit in the judgment seat and have empathy at the exact same time. Instead, what happens is our empathy takes a shot and our judgment rises, and we decide whether or not those people in front of us are worth our time. So what I've taken away from this, and what I'm continually processing through, is I need to be aware that although I hold in tension the reality that it's true, I live such a privileged and blessed life. I don't have to worry about food on the table. I haven't lost my job. I'm not grieving right now the loss of a loved one. I do have disappointments, and I do have different hardships, and I do have areas in my life that I am grieving. I'm grieving the loss of independence, grieving the loss of convenience. And yes, we want to hold those things within a perspective, but I can't minimize it. I need to work through it. I need to sit at the feet of my own body, and I need to allow God to come in and to bring comfort where it is needed, so that I can then be my whole self for others. I'm also aware of the fact that if I don't work through that, then what happens oftentimes is if I'm feeling just this struggle and feeling hardship and feeling emotionally down, then I often take the judgment seat and put other people's feelings and sufferings through the Olympics, and I become the judge that enables myself to say, I'm either going to show empathy here or I'm not. I'm either going to show compassion here or not, based on how I'm feeling. I hope this is encouraging to you. I hope it's not discouraging. I hope that you were able to hear these ideas and these reflections, and may we move together as a community towards, yes, good perspective, but realizing that suffering is suffering, and that in order to be whole human beings, we need to give empathy and compassion to ourselves and to others. All right, that's it for me. Hey, maybe you are wondering, is there room for me to start making some masks? Or maybe will these wonderful women help me understand or teach me how to make these masks? If so, reach out to me or Ruth, and we'd love to connect with you. Also, maybe you're feeling like, wow, that comparative suffering thing really hit home, and I don't even know where to begin to work through some of the disappointment and the worry and the grief that I'm experiencing, because I've just pushed it down in light of the other grief and the other suffering that I've seen in the world. And if that's you, please know that I'm available, and I would love to give you some of these podcasts. I'd love to give you some of these resources and to be a listening ear. Anyways, thanks so much for being the amazing community that you are. I look forward to being in person.